There is an undefeated matchup taking place to open up a Big Ten conference play. You have the 3-0, fourth-ranked Michigan Wolverines hosting the 3-0 unranked Maryland Terrapins tomorrow at noon Eastern Time. Both teams are 2-1 against the spread. Both teams have scored north of 40 points per game thus far. I would tab both teams as being more offensively focused than defensively focused, and both teams have great pass games and great running games. Maryland's run game in particular being underrated in a similar way to Michigan's passing game being underrated. Maryland's looked at as a pass-heavy offense, Michigan as a run-heavy offense, and while there is some truth to those things, in reality, both offenses run by Dan Enos and Mike Loxley at Maryland, and Jim Harbaugh, Matt Weiss, and Sharon Moore at Michigan, both are good in both the passing and running element to their offenses, and both have big plays in the run and pass departments. The question for both of these teams revolves around the defense. Maryland's defense allowing 19.3 points per game, Michigan's allowing only 5.7. But to Maryland's credit, they've played a great offensive team in the SMU Mustangs. Michigan has played nobody. Literally no one. UConn, Hawaii, Colorado State. They just beating them just shows that Michigan is efficient and that Michigan isn't a bad football team. That at minimum they are an above average good football team. And I would conclude this by the way that they beat Hawaii, Colorado State, and UConn, scoring 50 or more points and allowing at most 10 points in those three matchups. This is an interesting game. I think that Michigan, they're 6-0 against Maryland in the Jim Harbaugh era. They're heavily favored, but Maryland, if they're going to win a big game, might as well be now because they have not won a big game in ages. You'd probably have to go back to the Ralph Friedgen era at Maryland in the early 2000s to when Maryland won a significant football game. They won the ACC under Ralph Friedgen. That was their last conference title, if I'm not wrong, was in the early 2000s. So Maryland has an opportunity here to put themselves on the board nationally in a way that I think Purdue did when they came into Iowa, who was ranked number 2 at the time, and just straight up beat them using their efficient pass game and Aiden O'Connell and David Bell. Maryland very well could do the same thing here. The difference is I think this Michigan team is much better and not at all overrated like last year's Iowa team in the middle of the season when they were ranked 2nd in the country and had a great offense, but a great defense, but a not so great offense. Great offense, never an Iowa thing. But anyway, let's get right into this video, and if you're new to the channel or if you've been watching for a while, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and comment down below your prediction for this game before you view mine. So, this game again takes place at noon Eastern Time, and it will air on Fox. So, Michigan once again gets Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt. I don't know if they've gotten them yet this year, but it looks like Michigan's going to get them several times, and I'm pretty confident they're going to get them for the Ohio State-Michigan game, the game at the end of the year, which I'm very hyped for, as I believe that that will be a top 3 matchup, possibly a top 2 matchup that I am very excited for. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. That's game 12. This is just game 4, and Michigan has to get by Maryland first before they get to Ohio State. And speaking of this, I have Maryland in my top 25. I have them tabbed at 24th. I have Michigan higher than the polls do, actually. I have them at 3rd in the nation. So I view both of these teams in higher regard than the average college football fan and average college football analyst do. I think that Maryland, with their schedule, with how they've looked, how their offense is, and how teams on their schedule have looked so far, Maryland has a very realistic chance to get 8 or 9 wins in the regular season, not even including their bowl game. Michigan's given an 84.7% chance to win, according to ESPN's FPI. Wisconsin versus Ohio State, another game that's taking place that I think is a it's the biggest test so far for Ohio State to face Wisconsin, much like it's Michigan's biggest test thus far of the year to face Maryland. Ohio State's given an 89% chance to win in that matchup. So both Michigan and Ohio State, they have, solid tasks in front of them, but they're still heavily favored, and Michigan will be heavily favored against most teams that they face. Maybe not Penn State, maybe not Michigan State, but they're going to be favored in every game of the regular season, minus the Ohio State game, where they're currently a 10-point underdog. And Michigan's favored by 17 points to beat Maryland. This surprised me just a tad. I thought that Michigan might have been favored in the lower to mid-20s, but no. They're favored by 17, and I understand why. The over-under is 64.5, by the way, and Michigan's favored by minus 700 money line. Michigan's only favored by 17 points in part because I look at this and I think that Maryland so far has been handed a tougher test. Playing SMU, who's miles better than any team Michigan has faced thus far, because every team that Michigan has faced and every team that Maryland has faced outside of SMU has been absolute dog poop. So, yeah, Maryland having a tougher schedule, beating SMU, which is, it's a good win, honestly, coming from behind, showing that you can be mentally tough and that your offense can score north of 30 points against a solid group of 5 team. That's good for Maryland, good progress for Mike Locksley, who was 3-0 last year in conference play. So Maryland, they have an offense, and their defense so far looks to be improved compared to last year, which was a huge weakness. Penalties, which nearly lost them the game against SMU. That's an issue that was at Maryland last year, and it's an issue that seems to be prevalent again this year. But the reality is that Maryland's offense, there is a chance that they will match up very well with Michigan's defense, who is new, they're young, the secondary, especially along with the defensive line, and Maryland's offensive line, which are full of veterans. All 5 of their starters this year were starters last year. And they have Rakim, Jarret, and Dontay Demus, who were the 2 best wide receivers of Maryland last year back, along with Taulia Tagovailoa. So Maryland's offense is much more experienced, and they're much more experienced than proven than Michigan's defense. And often that's a combination that just looking at it and seeing that Maryland has 5-star Rakim Jarret, and Taulia Tagovailoa was a 4-star recruited out of Alabama. He has a top 25 QBR nationally. That's often a combination that right there would straight up favor Maryland. Of course, Michigan's defense is better than Maryland's defense, and Michigan's offense overall is probably better than Maryland's offense too. That's why Michigan's favored by 3 scores, 2 touchdowns with 2 extra points and 1 field goal. But Maryland isn't a crapshoot like Hawaii, UConn, and Colorado State are. They're absolutely not. Maryland's much better by miles than any of those teams. Michigan, I'd give them an edge at staff by a mile. Same with trench play. Same with defense, so linebacker, defensive back, defensive line, and special teams. And tight end, I'd give them a solid edge there too. Quarterback and wide receiver are areas that are closer than the standard mean. I think that wide receiver, if you are truly objective, you're going to give wide receiver to Maryland with Rakim Jarret, Dontay Demus, Jacob Copeland. I'm taking those 3 any day, every day, over Ronnie Bell, Cornelius Johnson, and Roman Wilson. At running back, Roman Hemby, very underrated player, very underrated running back in general. I think he's good. I think that Maryland, the way they've been running the football, is good. They're one of the leaders in the Big Ten in yards per carry. I think the leader actually in yards per carry in the Big Ten, and they have a good offensive line as well. But with Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, CJ Stokes, just by depth and individual player, I think Corum's the better individual running back. Combining the 2 rooms, I'm giving that to Michigan. Quarterback's interesting. I think depth goes to Michigan because J.J. McCarthy, Davis Warren, Alan Bowman, Cade McNamara. You separate all 4 of those and put them at different schools, and all 4 of those guys could start at different Power 5 schools, in my opinion. But Taulia Tagovailoa is the most proven out of them. Is he the most talented? We'll have to wait and see. J.J. McCarthy certainly was rated higher coming out of high school, but he isn't as proven yet. But because Michigan has better depth, and I've been high on McCarthy from the start, he's looked good in the 2 games he's played, so I'm going to continue to ride on the train. I'm not saying that he's a lock for the number 1 pick like some people at Pro Football Focus are, which I think is ridiculous, but he's a good quarterback, a solid quarterback. So I'm going to give the edge there to Michigan, but there are several arguments to give the edge there to Maryland, and I think that Taulia Tagovailoa, he has better experience, and that is going to show at moments compared to J.J. McCarthy, who is going to be learning, to a certain degree, learning on the job, as this is his first year starting. But we shall see. Michigan is ranked 4th in ESPN's FPI, compared to Maryland being ranked 29th. There is a solid gap between these 2 teams. A very solid gap indeed. Michigan has 20.9 football power index points. Maryland just has 9.8. What's funny about that is that's the same gap between Michigan and Georgia. That's the same friggin' gap. The same gap, which just goes to show how good Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State are, the top 3, compared to the rest of the nation. I happen to think that thus far, I know Alabama's played a tougher schedule than Michigan. I think that Michigan is of a similar par or better than this year's Alabama team, but I have reasons for that. Alabama struggling at the offensive line. Their wide receivers don't look good. It honestly looks like Bryce Young is carrying this team more than he carried last year's team, just so far. But Ohio State and Georgia, I think for sure, this year are on they're on a different level than the rest of the nation. And certainly Georgia, by the way that they have played, I have Ohio State still ranked ahead of them because I think that Ohio State's offense would just match up well with them. But Georgia has certainly looked the part the best in the nation. They've looked the part. Michigan's ranked 4th in the FPI. I've already mentioned that. They're the 14th most talented team nationally, and they're the 2nd most efficient college football team, only behind Georgia. It's Georgia, then Michigan for team efficiency. Michigan is the number 11 most efficient offense, and they have a top 10 efficient defense and special teams. Maryland's ranked 29th in ESPN's FPI. They're the 39th most talented team, and the Terps are the 27th most efficient team in college football. The Terrapins, just looking at it, you'd think that they're more efficient on offense, and they very much are. They're top 20 in efficiency, 18th specifically on offense, 62nd in defense, and 39th in special teams. And I view Maryland as just barely a top 25 team or just outside of the top 25. I think that the Big Ten East, just looking at their multiple 3-0 starts outside of Michigan State, who's faced a Washington team who was underrated from the beginning of the year to their credit, the Big Ten East, I'm thinking thus far, is the deepest division in college football. I will say that this year. The best, we'll have to see, because who wins the national title certainly will help decide that. But for now, I think that they're certainly the deepest in the country. And speaking of depth, there are multiple players to watch during this game. I don't think it's exactly clear who the players of each team are that are going to be ones that you should watch and pay attention to. I think for Maryland, it's Roman Hemby, but it could also be Taulia Tagovailoa or Dontay Demus or Rakim Jarret, because of both of these teams' offenses are fantastic. I mean, I think right here, looking at this, I think that Ohio State and Michigan are the top 2 teams by offense in the Big Ten, and it's not necessarily close. But Maryland, if there is to be a team that's like the closest to those 2, I'm thinking that it's Maryland, probably at 3rd, just for now. And Roman Hemby and Maryland's ground game has been very underrated. Michigan has actually allowed more rush yards per game than pass yards per game. They've allowed 102.7 pass rush yards per game, only 91.3 pass yards per game. And while I do think that this Michigan D-line has learned from what Kenneth Walker did to them, you saw after that MSU game last year that Michigan's run defense made sure that didn't happen again. Granted, they didn't face a running back as talented as Kenneth Walker III, but they faced one who was close, like in Travion Henderson, or they faced James Cook or Zamir White. They didn't torch us on the ground at all, but the latter two did, they did burn us through the air. Let's not even talk about that. Anyway, Michigan's defense, if they're anything like last year's unit, is going to be much better at defending the pass, or at least containing it, than they are going to be the run. And Roman Hemby, if Maryland wants to win this game, they are going to have to run the football well. Because like last year, Ohio State's an example where they couldn't run effectively, so they were forced to pass. It gave Michigan cushion. It forced Ohio State to burn the clock regardless, because Michigan would give them 5 or 10 chunk yard plays, but no further. And then when they got in the red zone, it would take them until 4th or 3rd down to finally convert and get that next first down. Maryland cannot be forced into that situation. If they are, they will lose because their defense is not containing this Michigan offense, which brings me to Ronnie Bell. I think that Ronnie Bell, he currently leads the Michigan Wolverines in receiving yards with 181. He has 1 receiving touchdown on 14 receptions. He's a senior, started off as a walk-on, switched to football kind of last minute, went to Michigan. He played in 2020, 2019, 2018. He had 1 reception for a 76-yard touchdown in 2021 before, on a punt return, I think he tore his ACL and was out for the season, which was very unfortunate. But I think that Ronnie Bell or Roman Wilson or Cornelius Johnson, one of these Michigan wide receivers, and I'm just going to go with the most veteran one and the guy who's proven the most in Ronnie Bell, him and J.J. McCarthy are going to connect, and they are going to expose a Maryland secondary who was on Michigan State's level last year. The difference was Maryland also was terrible at defending the run, so everyone didn't always pass against them. They would run against them too. And I think that they're going to expose that Maryland secondary. Blake Corum, he could be a player of the game too, but I've already mentioned him. I've already mentioned J.J. McCarthy, who could be a player of the game. I wanted to switch it up, go a little more specific, and I think that it's going to be one of Michigan's wide receivers. A.J. Henning could be another one too, especially looking at special teams. He returned a kickoff on a trick play against Maryland last year, and he returned a punt for a touchdown just this last week against UConn. So those are my players of the game. Watch out for Ronnie Bell, J.J. McCarthy, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, Blake Corum, and watch out for Roman Hemby, Rakim, Jarret, Dontay, Demus, and Taulia Tagovailoa for the Terrapins. This brings me to my prediction. Michigan's passing game is going to be on fire. J.J. McCarthy is going to once again have an amazing game against this Maryland team whose defense is very limited. They're not so efficient. They have depth issues all around. And yeah, Michigan is going to have no problem scoring points. The question is Maryland going to have an issue keeping up with Michigan? If they can keep up with Michigan, they can win the game. If they can't, well then, they can't. There's no doubt in my mind that Michigan will be able to score on the Terrapins, and there will be big play after big play that goes in favor of the Wolverines. And Michigan's pass defense will pass their first test. Now, I didn't say they would pass it with A+ or B+ level. I said passing, which means that they can allow some throws, they can get burned a few times, as long as they keep it within reason and contain Maryland to allow Michigan's offense to run. They're going to pass their first test. It's the secondary for the Wolverines. It's the Wolverines secondary's first game of the season against an opponent with a competent passing attack. And Michigan's probably not going to face a passing attack as good as this Maryland team until they face Ohio State at the end of the year. Maryland has the second or third best passing attack in the Big Ten. And this game will also help determine if theirs or Michigan's is better in the Big Ten. Michigan's certainly looks like it could be the second best in the Big Ten, but Maryland's by proof, by what they did last year and by their current roster, I'd say I would favor them in that category for now. But this game is certainly going to help determine that. I still think that Michigan has the best or one of the best running attacks in the nation, certainly the second or first best in the Big Ten. And their defense looks a lot better than I thought it was going to. Granted, they've only played 3 games against bad opponents, but Michigan's defense is going to step up. Their passing game will be on fire. There's a very realistic chance it contends for the second best in the Big Ten. There will be a big play through the air and a big play on the ground at minimum, probably more than that. For Maryland, Taulia Tagovailoa will have a decent game, but he will be limited because Michigan, the overall talent advantage, the crowd noise, everything points in Michigan's favor here. Everything except for Taulia Tagovailoa's wide receivers matching up with Michigan's corners. And that, yes, it goes Maryland's way, but if Michigan can get an effective pass rush, force Taulia Tagovailoa to overthrow or underthrow or inaccurately pass to one of his players, it doesn't matter if, Rakim Jarret is just burning Will Johnson if Taulia Tagovailoa panics and throws to a Michigan linebacker. It doesn't matter. And I think that here, Michigan's just poised for, I think, success overall, especially because their offense and how it matches up against Maryland's defense. It's going to force Maryland's offense to be near perfect on every drive, and I don't think that's going to happen. Maryland's run game, on the other hand, I think Taulia Tagovailoa will have a decent game or a below-average game because of how this Michigan defense works. But I think their run game will have some success, and I think Roman Hemby will have a touchdown run, and he will have some runs that make Michigan's defense and Michigan fans themselves uncomfortable, I think, because he's a good running back and because Maryland's offensive line is better than it was last year. And last but certainly not least, I want to mention that this is a good Maryland team. They can get 8 or 9 wins, and with how, just looking at their schedule, let's pull up Maryland's schedule here. Maryland's schedule, they started off pretty easy, which is, it helps build the momentum. One of the benefits of having an easy schedule is that it helps you build momentum and sort of iron out some of your mistakes. The bad thing about it is if you have too easy of a schedule, you won't always know what your mistakes are until they hit you right in the face. Maryland, after playing at Michigan, they host Michigan State October 1st. It's a very winnable game and a game that I would currently favor Maryland to win. They host Purdue October 8th, which is another game I'd favor Maryland to win. They played Indiana on the 15th, host Northwestern the 22nd. I would favor Maryland in both of those games too. So Maryland could be very well 7-1 entering their game at Wisconsin, which is a game that I think is winnable for Maryland. Would I favor them? Don't exactly know. I think for me that'd be pretty 50-50. They're not going to be favored against Penn State November 12th, that's for sure. Not against Ohio State November 19th, but they certainly look better than Rutgers November 22nd. So their schedule, I'd say right now, give them 8 or 7 wins on their schedule right now and potentially a 9th. This is a good football team with a great offense, a below-average defense, but Mike Locksley, Dan Enos, they're doing well in offense, and offense is the name of the game in college football. So this is a solid Maryland team. It's just not enough to go into Ann Arbor against a great or even elite, I'm going to go and say, Michigan team and beat them. It's not going to be enough to win here. So 59-24 is going to be the final score, in my opinion. If Maryland makes it competitive, it will more likely be just that Maryland scores more points. I'm anticipating a shootout here if it's going to be a close game or a Maryland win. If it's going to be a Michigan win, it's going to be a Michigan just hanging points after points after points. And that is all I have to say for this video. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to the channel or if you've just been watching this video and you're impressed by it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell so you can get notified when I make a new video or go live, which is coming soon, I promise. And if you're listening via Spotify, make sure to follow the channel. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.